farm communities to small towns and everything in between. People often drive by, fly over, or otherwise overlook these places. They're rarely the topic of conversation, and they usually don't make national headlines. Yet God has not overlooked them and deeply desires that people living in those communities hear the good news of the gospel and come to meet Jesus. The EFCA's roots are deeply embedded in rural America. And in this age, with increasing ministry focus in urban areas and large places, how might we continue to support and extend gospel ministries into some of these more overlooked places? Well, pastors serving in these communities experience many blessings, but they also face unique challenges. And in the midst of this, God has called them to humbly serve and to pursue his Great Commission work in some really incredible places. But what specific challenges do pastors in some of these overlooked communities face, and how can they effectively share the gospel with all people in the wonderful and yet very unique places where God has placed them? Well, to discuss the topic, I'm joined today by my friend Ronnie Martin, a church planter and founding pastor of Substance Church in Ashland, Ohio. Ronnie's the author of 6 books, including a book entitled Pastoring Small Towns. And what I appreciate so much is Ronnie has a deep heart for pastoral ministry, for seeing churches planted, and for seeing God do some work in profound and really significant ways. So, Ronnie, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to have you here and chat about these very important things.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Ronnie, you moved from Southern California to plant a church in a small town in Ohio. Can you give us a little sense of what was that adjustment like, and how has God worked in you during that process?
Oh, man, it's such a great question. You know, it's something I'm still adjusting to, by the way. Some days, and the adjustment is still real. But, you know, I was naive, I think, when I moved to Ohio from Southern California. I had narrowed everything down to a kind of a spiritual perspective that said, you know what? People are the same. They all need the gospel. There's really no differences when it comes down to it, right? And I was so wrong about that, because people are, they're whole beings, and they have stories that have shaped them from a variety of sources and unique challenges based on their families, their geographies, and everything in between. So I had to learn what a person in Ashland, Ohio was like, what they valued, what their fears were, what their idols were, the things that they battle on a day-to-day basis. And I'm still learning that, to be honest. So I think the big thing that the Lord has done in the last 13 years since we relocated has just been profound and hard works of humility, for sure. That's been a big part of it, I think, for me. Yeah.
Well, and you know, I mean, Ronnie, what you just said to me really connects back to some of the things I learned being a leader in Reach Global and a missionary for a decade. I mean, in many of the same things that a missionary would go into a community to look for, the very things you just talked about, needing to understand the community, needing to continue to learn. And those are all the things that God's been teaching you, which is extremely important. So as you think about it, what are some of the unique struggles in disciple making and church planting in a more rural context?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I think in my setting specifically, which is, you know, this is rural, small town Ohio. Our town is situated between 2 major cities, Cleveland, Columbus. But I think specifically to this context, it's that one of the big challenges is that people have come from a very churched background. So this is a town where, if you can picture it, like, you know, the mayor actually prays in Jesus' name during public gatherings, and everybody is happy about it. He's not getting any pushback. The challenge that comes with that is that most people believe they are Christians based on the traditional values that they're raised with, or you know, the fact that they've just attended a church most of their lives. So when you begin to unpack the gospel for them, a different story can begin to emerge, which is also been one of the exciting things that happens in ministering in a place like this, in a small place. And it's that people's eyes are opened to the grace of Jesus. Their eyes are open to the realization that I think being just a moral person in a town that's great to raise a family in is not the same thing as having a love and an affection for Jesus, trusting him alone for your salvation. So I think that has been probably the biggest challenge, is that there's a religiosity that permeates the town, and breaking through that and saying, well, no, that is different than knowing Jesus, knowing about Jesus, being raised around Jesus, being okay with Jesus is different than having a relationship with Jesus. And that is just something that in the last 13 years has just come back and come back and come back. And it's a realization that's been really helpful for me to understand, to process, to grow through, and to speak to people, given that they're coming to us a lot of times, on that particular level. So that would be one of the really unique struggles for sure.
Well, you just described the small town that I grew up in. And so
Oh,
yeah, I mean, that it's there, and it's so real, so important to understand. And yet finding that way to be able to connect the message of the gospel into the hearts and the lives of the people that
yeah.
God's entrusted you to be able to rub shoulders with and to get to
Wow.
know. And as you think about the unique work of pastoring in a small town, is there like one main lesson to say, wow, this is one lesson I've really learned by pastoring in a smaller community?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The thing that hits me when you ask that is, I think the big one, which is something that I'm actually pretty happy about, is there's this thing called slowness when when you're ministering in a small town, and people do not expect things to be fast and famous. And in fact, there's probably a general suspicion of things that are. So because I'm from Southern California, my tendency was to move faster, because that's part and parcel of the really just the California culture in general, but especially the culture I was in being in Southern California. But the expectation in this context to go slow, it really can be a beautiful thing, especially for a pastor, because it really, in a sense, it helps you learn the pace of Jesus, which is a rhythm of slow and steady maturation. And so I think it's taught me to be patient with others, because they are incredibly patient with you. There's a sense that you can say slowness really is next to godliness in this particular context. And that's great for pastoral ministry, because nobody is waiting around for you to cast the big vision and to tell them where you're going next. It's like, hey, we're good. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Let's just stay faithful to the sometimes very mundane work that God has given to us. And we got you. We're supporting you. And we just want to know that we're serving the Lord faithfully, and we're not looking for, lights and fogs and all kinds of the big things that maybe are more characteristic of larger towns, bigger ministries. There's a contentment to that. There's a peace to that. And I will have to say that sometimes there can be a frustration to that too, because I would like to see things move a little bit quicker sometimes. But it's all in the Lord's providence that he's put me in a place that has not only slowed me down, but that slowness has taught me more of, really the way of Jesus in that sense,
Well, I think, Ronnie, too, what you've just described is the fact that all ministry is really based in relationship.
Yeah, 100%.
Relationships involve trust and time to be able to build them. And that's the significance of investing in the lives of people, because really, ministry is about people.
Yeah,
And it
that's
takes
so well
time
said.
to be able to do that.
Yeah, well said.
So how have you seen the Great Commission lived out? In your life, in your church, in your community, as I know that's a passion of your heart is to live out the Great Commission. What are some of the ways you've seen it lived out?
It's a great question, because there's some practical things that happen in a rural setting that are very interesting. They're very unique. I think one of the benefits in terms of talking about Great Commission work, and again, this kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning, but it's people are not offended by religious institutions out here, so that's just a very unique reality. And again, that can be to the negative, because people become inoculated to the gospel on one hand. but they also don't mind you coming in and partnering with them on all kinds of different things, so we've been able to partner with other organizations. We're set up in the downtown area of our town. And so we've been able to partner with other downtown organizations. We just are able to find commonality with people, with businesses, with institutions that are all about, a further cultivation of the community. So, whether it's the Red Cross, whether it's some charity organizations, whether it's, these citywide cookout events that we have started and we're involved with, there's opportunities to be very imaginative and creative with the way that you can do great commission work. And there's going to be a receptivity with people in the town, with organizations in the town. And they're going to be really eager to even partner with you because they see you as doing something good for the community. And everybody's all about that. And so you develop relationships in that context that sometimes will lead people coming into your church or allow you to have spiritual conversations with people in settings that normally it would just be so off limits, because you got to be so careful. And, I believe in being careful, in how we present the gospel, and to do it in a very gracious and loving way. And so the Lord provides really unique opportunities in this setting. And I've just been floored by that because coming from Southern California, that was not the case. It's a completely different culture. People receive things quite differently. So this has been very interesting, and I'm still learning about how to better do these things. But those have been some of the interesting realities for sure.
Well, it is. In fact, I found I had the opposite experience. I was in a smaller university town in my first church. And in fact, in that particular community, I served on the curriculum committee for the local school district.
All right.
And there was tremendous opportunities to be engaged in things in the community, and then moved to San Jose, California, and it was a whole different deal.
Yeah.
Where I couldn't get, it was hard to get engaged in much of anything
Yeah.
in that same way. So there's some great opportunities though in smaller communities to get involved in those kinds of things.
Yeah, 100%.
As you think about though, in local church ministry, in smaller towns and smaller communities, what are some of the challenges to keep the kind of the all nations, kind of all people aspect of what the church is and what God's heart is for all people, and for those who maybe aren't like you or like me?
Yeah, I think that's really well. That's well said. There is a challenge. What I've noticed, especially when we talk about small towns, I think the challenge for most people that live in these types of communities is just remembering that there is a big world out there that is lost, baseline, right? And also that it's not something to be avoided. There's a sense with people that live in small towns or people that relocate to small towns. So whether they were born and raised here or whether they relocate to small towns, there's a sense of we're getting away from what is bad into what is good and safe, what can become a refuge to me and my family. And we know that intrinsically that's not true, in many ways. But I think, I think one of the things, first off, is I think being part of the EFCA is very helpful because it helps widen people's vision for what's out there. And we talk about, reach global and those types of things. So people can have a really good sense of that. We're also part of a church planting network called Harbor Network, which also helps our people get a sense that we can have an influence with the gospel beyond our small town. So I think what you're always trying to do is open people's eyes to the fact that, hey, there's something bigger going on than what is happening in our small world, which is important and valuable to God, right? But there is something going on beyond that. So I think the big thing for us is acknowledging when painful things happen outside of our bubble, right? Things are happening in the world. We commit to pray for those things. So when we see racial things, especially that have just, that have happened, in bigger cities over the last couple of years, things that are grievous, and egregious things, to the name of Christ and to the gospel, we bring those things up. We talk about those things. We say, hey, these things are happening and they feel like they're far away, but there are churches over there that are being affected by these things. And because they're affected, it means we're effective because we're part of this one big church and we also want to weep with those who weep. And so this is a way that even in a small sense, we have to be intentional about saying, hey, we watch the news, we see what's going on. It might not be happening right here for us, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be affected by it, that we shouldn't care about it, that we shouldn't commit to being prayerful about it, and then to reach in ways that we can. Very difficult, very, very difficult. And I would say that is one of the most difficult things in terms of pastoring, ministering in a small town context, is reminding everybody that there is something going on out there and it should really matter to us, right?
Well, and so that they would experience and in a sense demonstrate the heart of Jesus.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
What's the heart of Jesus for people? And there may be something happening a long ways away, but the heart of Jesus still cares. Just like there are things happening in your community, and Jesus cares in the lives and the hearts of those people as well.
Yeah.
Ronnie, it's just been so good to talk with you about these things. What word of encouragement would you give to pastors and leaders in churches in some of these overlooked places and some smaller communities?
I think you just mentioned it really well, to be honest. I think that the biggest encouragement I can probably give is the most simple, which is that you're not overlooked by Jesus, and I don't know what could be more important than that on one sense. Over and over again in Scripture, we get the sense that those who serve the Lord in hidden ways will receive their reward from the Lord, right? And that is true for all those serving in unseen ways in overlooked places. It's super difficult for us in the world we live in, which is, because of social media, and we are giving ourselves over to greater ways in terms of exposing ourselves and building platforms. And I think people that minister in these places feel like that they are often sort of left behind because, they're serving in places that publishing houses and even denominations just don't give a lot of time and attention to. So, the Lord has people serving in very noticeable ways too. So it's not the amount of quote unquote talents he's given us, but it's what we do with whatever he's given us. And so I guess my encouragement is that the Lord sees you and you are not any less important or valued as those that he has given greater influence to, bigger congregations to. The Lord sees the work that we're doing. And in the end, whether he's given you 10 talents, 5 talents, or 1 talent, he's going to say, hey, what did you do with what I gave you? Were you faithful with what I gave you? And that what matters is what's going to be our reality in the end when we're face to face with Jesus. And I just think that truth has to be what encourages us, motivates us, and just propels us for sure.
Ronnie, well said. You've captured so much of the heart of the Lord Jesus for his church and for the people that are part of his church and the people that are in the communities where those churches live and serve and worship and engage with people. And so the opportunities we have to take the good news of the gospel and share it in word and deed, and really share our lives with people around us, a significant opportunity for pastors and leaders in small towns, medium-sized towns, and large cities too. But especially as we think about the EFCA, that so many of our churches are in communities like yours, and communities where they're doing incredible things for the gospel and touching people's lives. And the Lord is smiling. I can see the smile of God for the faithfulness and fruitfulness out of the work of his people in communities of all sizes. Ronnie, thanks for sharing it with us today. God bless you in your ministry there in Ashland, and we look forward to hearing more about what he's going to continue to do in your life and your ministry in the days to come.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Kevin. I really appreciate it.